What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick.
I'm Jammin, John.
And we have an album review for you, and one that I was looking forward to, and also, honestly, didn't really expect, but I'm not complaining one bit. We are going over the debut full-length from Living Gate, Suffer as One. This also comes out on the 25th of October on Relapse Records. This band formed in 2020 in both Belgium and the US. Now, while this is their first full-length album, we actually went over their Deathlust EP back in 2020 when we still had no idea really what we were doing. And the lighting was poor, the audio possibly was worse, and we might have been slightly dumber back then, believe it or not.
I would agree. It was pretty bad. I wouldn't ever go back and watch those reviews. Like, we did them, they're there, but don't go watch them.
This band also kind of falls under the banner of supergroup. They feature members of Yob, Weisdude, Oathbreaker, Amen Ra, and I mean, that's like kind of the whole Cult of Ra or Church of Ra, I think, group where there's like probably like 8 other bands that I'm not mentioning that these guys are all part of, but the member from Yob is clearly from the US, so he's the only one that's not involved in all the other bands.
Yeah.
They pretty much just decided to get together and do a flat-out death metal project, and it might have happened when Amen Ra was on tour with Yob, which I caught that one. Voivod was also on the bill too. It was an amazing show, and I honestly didn't expect a full length because I figured all these guys were busy with their other projects. I mean, especially all the guys from Belgium, because they're all in like 8 bands apiece or some shit. So when I saw some tracks start to pop up, I was pretty damn excited, and I was also like, wow, they actually managed to like get together and track an entire album while they're all in these other projects. Bravo, guys.
I saw a couple singles pop up on Spotify, and I was like, ooh. And then I saw the email that said full length, and I said, wait a minute. And here we are, and it is every bit of the awesome I thought it would be. I got into these guys when we did the EP back in 2020 and just kind of actually forgot about them. And based on the EP, this feels a bit different than the EP did, notably in the influence change.
Yeah, all right. Now, it's no secret that these guys love Morbid Angel. I mean, their logo looks kind of similar to Morbid Angels. Like, there's a certain cross and arrow thing in there that's just like, yeah, I know where you got that from. But on this album, I feel like you hear a lot more of their influences, where Deathlust definitely felt more akin to just like Morbid Angel and, you know, some other acts as well. This one really branches out a lot more into like, well, you know, more like precise, brutal, like bands like Suffocation, I would say like Blood Red Throne, Decapitated, but also more atmospheric death metal bands like, you know, like later Gorguts. In fact, there are moments on here that 100% reminded me of From Wisdom to Hate. And also bands like Immolation, and I would even say like Mitochondrion to a degree, because there is a lot of just twisting, churning, nuts, atonal, and distant riffing on here, but it's also balanced out with a hefty amount of just flat-out brutal chugging.
And you don't get that right off the bat. To Cut the Head of the Snake is more, I think, where the Gorguts comes in. Like, that song is just straight up wild. Just wild, blasty tremolo sections. And while there is some chug, that's not the primary focus right off the bat. So you wouldn't get the idea that this record is as brutal as it is until you get to the breakdown of that song. You don't get the idea that it's going to be a brutal banger of an album.
I mean, I got an idea it was going to be a brutal banger, but I mean, it's just insane. And man, this band's riff work is just nuts. I mean, it's top notch, it's catchy, but it's also very technical, but it's not technical to the point where it feels like just needless wankery. Like, every riff on here contributes to the atmosphere and the vibe. It's intricate, but it also remains sinister and brutal at times. And those shifts between the two styles of like more atmospheric stuff to just flat out relentless chugging keeps this album, you know, kind of fresh. Like, it kind of keeps you on your toes. Songs like the title track and Destroy and Consume are primarily built on just relentless chugathons, like Triplet City. Destroy and Consume, there is a syncopated groove on there that instantly reminded us of Spheres of Madness off of Decapitated Senility, which anything that reminds me of that song, it's kind of like an instant win right there.
And I like how that song, too, the riff changes a bunch, but the drum beat doesn't. The underlying drum beat is just Again, reminded me of Spheres of Mantis, just without that little stutter that's in there. But like the whole time, it's just straightforward double kick, and the guy's going to town. But the riff changes so much, and there's so much syncopation. And again, chug fest straight through.
And while I would describe a lot of this as like very technical, I wouldn't call it tech death at all. Like it's just like intricate riff work, frequently harmonizing all kinds of riffs. Like there are harmonized triplet chugs all over this album that just reek of Terrence Hobbs. But there's also just like straight up kind of like clever old school dynamics, like a United Soul. A United Soul is essentially, you know, for the most part, one riff. Like this one riff that kind of carries throughout the song. It's just played differently, and there's like different ways they kind of accent it or like play a drum beat underneath it. Like you get like thrashy sections where it's faster, some blasts, and they'll slow it down on a groove, but constantly kind of toying with this main riff and kind of just tweaking it ever slightly. And this band is excellent when it comes down to like accents on riffs. Like you get these just nuts ascending and descending tremolos. And that frequently shifting uneasy atmosphere in here is just something that kind of draws you in just enough to get your head caved in by all the fucking brutality on here.
And some songs that feel more hyper-focused on some brutality are songs like Ones and Zeros and Overcome, Overthrow. Both of those are just menacing straight through and through. There's no focus on really anything except beating you over the head with these constant chuggy riffs, and that's all it is. Those songs are somewhat more voided of the elements such as the technical play and more melodies. Like this is just one after the other of either triplet chugs or off-time grooves or what have you, but that's the constant focus in both those songs.
You get a couple of moments where they kind of break out of it just to kind of like, you know, pepper in a little bit of atmosphere, but it is right back to that just blunt force trauma riffing. Same thing with the song Hunting Maggots, which I don't know if they're talking about actual maggots or Slipknot fans. I can't imagine either one's particularly that hard to hunt, but that song is kind of like what we're bringing up, singular in purpose, built on chugs, blasts, and a lot of clever rhythmic shifts in there. Like they don't necessarily kind of like abandon that main riff. They just kind of like fiddle with the rhythm behind it. And pretty much everything they do on here is just flat out savage. This whole album kind of runs like, I don't know, like my algorithm for a lot of things that I love about death metal. And it plays off of like a lot of different camps. Like just when I think it's getting maybe too atmospheric, it shifts into like a good groovy pattern with a solid riff. When I think it lays on a riff too long, it changes it up and gets like super chuggy and blasty for a bit. But all the songs flow well. There's enough time in between the changes for the most part to let every riff sink in. The vocals on here, I think, are really solid. And there's some interesting vocal dynamics every now and then, too. Atoms and Particles kind of shifts around from their almost kind of like Steve Tucker-ish sort of raspy roar. They kind of do some more like gaspy vocals on there. And then there are like these whispers to add some more creepy atmosphere, as if this album really needed that much more. And then just some like big bellows that kind of come out of the background and kind of layer with the growls.
The last track, CQC, also has some vocal dynamics in it. It's got some more higher pitched screams that go in with the low growls. The album doesn't switch around the vocal dynamic too much. For the most part, it's just a deep bellowing growl, again, akin to Steve Tucker.
And I would say, like, in terms of the guitar work in here, it is primarily focused on riffs and like clever harmonies and just like fun riff changes. There's still a fair amount of melody that pops up, like some good melodic hooks, especially in the lead work, which is kind of sparse on here, but when the leads show up, they add a lot to the songs, especially the last song, CQC, where it is notably probably one of the most melodic leads on here. But the riff work itself, it kind of reminded me of the band Superstition, which is, you know, more obscure, I guess, but if you know that band, they love to just kind of fiddle with like constantly crawling riff harmonies. And I feel like they do that to a degree on here, but a lot of this, again, is just built on chug. In fact, as the album went on, I felt like it got chuggier and more brutal. By the time you get to like the breakdowns that show up on like Overcome, Overthrow, the whole opening of the title track, it feels like it's just like an awesome nod to Pierce from Within. Like it's brutal, it's techie. Again, the triplets frequently harmonize and they're like ascending and descending. You get those stuttered kick grooves. Like the whole back half of this album it kind of just changes the vibe to just be, like, I don't know, more aggressive.
Now, the atmosphere in this record doesn't really leave. Towards the beginning, maybe a little bit into the middle, it's got more of the Gorguts feel. Just dissonant, atonal riffs and melodies, just enough to fill the space. But then when you get towards the end of the record, mainly in the last couple songs, it changes a little bit. The atmosphere becomes a whole lot more melodic and, like, almost like cleaner tones. Reminds me a lot of Mastodon.
Particularly Blood Mountain. Not only because I think that's like sonically one of Mastodon's heaviest albums, but the dissonant harmonies and like just the bludgeoning riffs, like ones you would hear in like Circle of Sasquatch and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. It kind of has the same feel. Like honestly, like even with the production on here, which is just thicker than a Snicker, like it's just gross sounding. It kind of reminded me a lot of just that whole vibe in the bigger, heavier sections of Blood Mountain. And how they work those melodies in, it kind of gives this album like a different vibe. Like the atmosphere kind of changes. It doesn't feel as uneasy. It feels more, I don't know, like etherical or something like that. The last track in particular, at the end, it really kind of slows down. And there are like big groovy pockets all over here. But this one slows down and the riffing becomes less intricate. It becomes just more straightforward. You even get some riffs that kind of drone on a bit. And then you get that Mastodonish atmosphere on top. And with those big droning riffs and, you know, the atonal, like, distant melodies and such, it really kind of has that vibe. And then they even pepper in, I think it's a spoken word, it might be a sample. I don't know. Like, I heard what sounded like a serial killer talking about serial killer shit. And my brain instantly went to Iceman just because I think we've had like 3 albums this year that sampled some crazy shit he said about murdering people.
And while we only really touched on the production, it is super dense, layers upon layers. There's a lot jam-packed in here. Surprisingly, you could hear it all, though. I didn't think at any time, really, that anything overpowered anything. The guitars, while they're fairly out front, still allow the drums to cut through at times. The bass work, too, dude. The bass doesn't have a lot of shining moments, but again, when you get to the end, CQC, there's a whole, like, isolated bass section, and you can hear him doing great runs. But the fact that that all cuts through in this, you know, density of a collapsed star is really neat. And the drum work, too. Holy shit. This guy is just beating the piss out of his drums. And that's what it sounds like the whole time. The kicks are punchy. The snare drum has a great pop. You can tell how hard he's hitting those drums.
Now, while it's obvious that we dig this album, because if we don't, we're doing a really good glow up on an album we think sucks. We don't. I did have some issues with some of the songs. For the most part, I think the transitions on here are really solid. Like, again, it's technical, tons of riff changes, but for the most part, the songs flow really well. There were a couple of songs where I thought some of the transitions were just a little odd and it kind of took away from the song, namely Atoms and Particles and Suffer as One, the title track. The title track comes in blazing like, again, a lost song off of Pierce from Within. Like, it instantly reminded me of that album and obviously made me very happy. But as the song went on, it goes into this atmospheric break, which I thought was going to be like a bridge. Like it was going to be an atmospheric build. Maybe we get like a cool lead in there. And you do get that. But then it kind of just peters out towards the end. And it kind of leaves the song hanging a bit because it felt like it was going to build back to like that heavier sound and then kind of like cap it off with some authority. And Atoms and Particles, while I like that song, it's probably the most transition happy song on the album. And some of the transitions in that song are just flat out odd. Like it kicks in the door heavier than hell. It's brutal and chuggy. And then it drops out to this atmospheric section with those gasping vocals. And like, all right, we're going to build into a whole other movement. And then it kind of just starts right back up again. Like that moment didn't happen. And then, you know, throughout the course of the song, like I noticed like the transitions were a little bit more jagged, a little bit more technical. Like this is where you get the whispered vocals. Granted, those do carry on a little bit more and they add like a really cool dynamic to the song. In fact, the vocal dynamics on that song are probably the thing that really stood out the most to me. But again, some of the transitions on there, I don't know, like they felt hammered out, but they just felt like kind of unnecessary at some points.
See, now, Atoms and Particles, to me, while that song is still groovy and does have some brutal moments in it, it is more focused, at least what I found, on things like melody and harmony. Like, there's a bunch of places where the hooks or the main focus of these transitions is just to build on this crazy melody. And like they keep it atonal, they keep it interesting, they harmonize it and whatnot.
There's also a strange interlude, massive depletion in E sharp minor. I'm glad they actually put the key in there. It's more about mood and just kind of sounding creepy. It's cool, but I don't know. It felt like kind of like a needless pit stop.
Yeah, and it doesn't really lead into anything. Like, it just kind of appears. I mean, it's cool, but it doesn't really serve a purpose. Still, all in all, I'm going to go ahead and give this record 4 stars, and it is a pretty solid 4. This record is unrelenting in riffy brutality. I'm a real chug fanatic anyway, but these guys just non-stop throughout these songs. The most brutal chugging you can think of. And the fact that they don't really abandon main riffs. They just build on them. They expound on them. They add some sort of off-time pattern, or they'll just straight machine gun it, or a bunch of like decapitated like start-stop moment chugs. I like the fact that they stick with the root of the song and build on it. That's really cool. Also, they pack a ton in these songs. For the most part, most of these songs are 3 minutes and some change, like 3 minutes 15 seconds, 3 minutes 30 seconds. There's only 2 songs on here that track in at 5 minutes or just a little above 5 minutes. So the fact that there are shorter songs that pack this much of a punch every time is also really cool. I like how it's techie, but it's not like technical wankery. It's more techie in the sense of, here's a really cool melodic run, we're gonna harmonize it, we're gonna use it as a tag, it's gonna catch your ear, it's gonna be the hook, there's gonna be memorable moments. Like, it's really cool, and I like that. I like the fact that it's not filled with wankery on top of all these chugs. Like, the main focus of this record is brutality. Nonetheless, there are still a lot of dissonant melodies, and Dissonance and I get along just as well as Chugs and I get along. So yeah, if you're into bands like Suffocation, Guts, Morbid Angel, Decapitated, Necrophagist, Mastodon, things like that, you're probably really going to dig this record. I would recommend checking it out.
I'm at a very solid 4 as well. For an album I totally did not expect to come out, this kind of surprised me. Not only because, I didn't expect it, it also sounded a little bit different than the EP, and I didn't expect to be bringing up Suffocation as much as I would be bringing up Morbid Angel. Mm-hmm. This album is riffy as hell. This might be one of the riffiest albums I've heard this year. I know, we've listened to a lot of albums with a lot of riffs. Just trust me, when you hear this album, you'll be like, all right, maybe they're on to something. This band's sound kind of sits comfortably between like old school death metal and modern death metal. It still has all the appeal of old school death metal, the grit, the filth, just the nasty riffs, but it also has like a little bit more of that dissonant atmosphere and, like a little bit more techie riffs that you would hear in modern death metal, but it doesn't overdo one too much to the point where it kind of overtakes the overall sound, which is just an awesome blend of a lot of killer death metal. Like, again, this kind of attacks my algorithm for death metal. It's like, hey, I know this fucking dickhead likes all this stuff. We're just going to jam pack everything we can in here that he loves, and he's going to give it 4 stars. Duh. Mm-hmm. I'm a pretty easy sell when it comes down to stuff like this, and this is recorded well, executed well. There's not much in the way of filler in here, and even like, the tracks that I had, light complaints about, I wouldn't kick them out of bed for eating crackers. That's for damn sure. If you're a big fan of Suffocation, Gore Guts, Decapitated, again, I would say like there's like a little bit of Mastodon here, and there's still Morbid Angel on here. It's just, less than the EP. If you just like death metal, plain and simple, just check this album out. Trust me, it's awesome. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We also have memberships now. They are only 99 cents, and the only perk we are currently offering is a members-only live stream, which we will probably pick up on that in November, just because October is absolutely insane with releases. Trust me, you'll see, because we're more than likely doing 6 reviews again this week. We also offer a booger troll, which is a sentence I'm still not used to saying out loud in front of a camera, but here we are once again, and I'm sure there's one floating right above me. That's kind of our de facto mascot. Sorry.
No, we're not. We're not sorry.
No, we're totally not sorry.
You get a booger troll.
You get a booger troll, and I will eventually load up other emojis, and there's a good chance they might be booger trolls too.
I mean, he's got to have a family.
Yeah. It's a face only a mother could love. that's also a booger troll. But yeah, this is the new way to directly support the channel. We are pretty much doing this to eventually get away from Patreon and also to supplement the fact that StreamYard is raising their prices. And I mean, granted, they are adding some new features and whatnot, so I suppose they could justify it, but it's still more money. But either way, if you would like to help us out there, there's a join button down below, and we also still have thrallsmetal.com with our t-shirts and hats and such. And if you would perhaps like to purchase one of our hats or shirts or whatever, there's a link down there for that too.
Hats, shirts, booger trolls, live streams, album reviews, discography rankings, collection updates, never-ending forums and segments. Everything we do here at Thralls of Metal, we do for you guys. We appreciate all of our family, our friends, our subscribers, everybody that supports us. Thank you for watching our videos and commenting and just becoming a part of the Thralls of Metal family. I didn't ever think it would get to be this big, but here we are, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
That is most definitely what she said. Anyway, you guys absolutely roll. Tons of content coming your way. So one more big thank you because of how awesome you guys are, and we will catch you later.